Lois Lane might be the best character in My Adventures with Superman. Yes, I know this is a weird way to start a video with this title, but it's true. My Adventures with Superman is a Superman show that sets itself apart with a greater emphasis on his relationship with Lois and Jimmy. Actually, there's Superman and Lois and Clark. Correction, My Adventures with Superman is a Superman show that sets itself apart with a greater emphasis on his relationship with Jimmy. Jokes aside, the very title of this show is from the perspective of Superman's human friends as we go through this alternate take on Superman's origin story. The show definitively has three main characters of relatively equal importance. Clark's main arc through the story is about his loneliness and the feelings of being an outsider as an alien refugee. Sprinkle in a warring expansionist Krypton and it leads to a lot of confusion and heartache. Lois has trust issues. As a result of her father's C- parenting style, she's a mix of inquisitive and distrusting that's really a big bundle of problems. Like, I think a big part of why she jumped off that building is less being mad at Clark for keeping his secret in general, and more being mad that he was keeping a secret that could get him killed without her knowing. Like her dad did with her mom. Jimmy's just vibing. But the bromance is strong and it keeps the two dumbasses in love I just described from getting too soap opera-ish. I think it's a really strong trio, and while the conclusion of Clark's arc in the second season was great, I still think Lois is a better character. Or at least I would, but from the moment Supergirl took her cousin from Metropolis, a small kind of big flaw in the way the story is written that I was only just starting to recognize suddenly ballooned into being extremely noticeable. The flaw in question? The show has trouble making all its main characters relevant to the plot. Okay, that's kind of vague. Let me put it another way. These squishy humans are lucky to be alive. Or I guess they are lucky their opponents become acutely incompetent when it comes to dealing with them. There has been a strong push to give superhero side characters more relevance beyond cheerleaders. This is why so many CW superheroes have whole teams of backup and emotional support who are actively involved in taking down the villains. But the thing about superheroes is, they're always doing extremely dangerous stuff. They only survive because they have superpowers or relatively unique skills. So there is an objective difference between them and everyone else. Now, this isn't impossible to navigate. Superheroes can't do everything, and if they need a hacker or a biologist on hand, that's great. It only really becomes a problem when the show overuses characters, or rather, runs out of ways to use characters as they exist and has to alter things to keep them relevant. I watched The Flash religiously for the first few seasons, and I can't for the life of me tell you what Iris was supposed to be doing that no one else could do after she stopped being a reporter. You know, besides her romantic relationship with Barry. And then they just started giving everyone superpowers, which at the very least was foreshadowed by their identities. And I stopped watching somewhere about season 5 or 6, and apparently now there are like 6 speedsters with Iris being one of them, so I really should stop talking about the show. Moving on. Now, this was mostly just a small tick in My Adventures with Superman, and it handled it pretty well. Season 1 was more of an investigative season. The characters are reporters and have leads that are slowly opening the mystery up to them. When they do wind up in danger, it's usually because they weren't expecting that level of crazy when they did their thing. And in the penultimate episode, Lois and Jimmy are able to give Superman encouragement through their audience. Well, mostly Jimmy's. It works and is consistent apart from that one weird incident with the Council of Interdimensional Loises that I keep forgetting exists. How well does it work? I didn't once think of this as a factor until season 2. Uh-oh.
You brought your mate, your fragile human mate, who does not have any of our powers.
Yeah, in season 2 I found myself asking, why are you bringing Lois with you into these places that are 100% guaranteed to be stupidly dangerous? And you're doing nothing to hide her identity while you do so. Honestly, I genuinely think it's a plot hole Waller didn't try to arrest Lois and Jimmy until the very finale of the season. This is where the problem really gets noticeable because I could feel the writers trying to justify Lois and Jimmy's continued effect on the story. Jimmy's bank account was basically their superpower this season. There is a point where offering emotional support ends and I find myself wondering what the characters think they're doing. I find it hilarious that in episode 3, Lois was struggling to open the doors to a building so she, Jimmy, Vicky Vale, and a 10-year-old girl could have a closer view of Superman trying to stop a giant explosion from taking out the city. Fortunately, they had a confetti-spitting helicopter. I say that derisively, but the fact they did find a way to help actually does nullify the criticism. Kind of. It's still a ridiculous look. At this stage, my biggest problem with Lois and Jimmy's inclusion wasn't really that they were actually being included. It's that the show seemed to kind of forget that they were reporters when it would be extremely inconvenient to the plot. Ever since I watched Young Justice Season 2, I have always hated when superheroes do nothing to publicly undermine their opponents or out their criminal plans to the public, and I keep seeing it happen so often. The sheer number of superheroes who could at the very least seriously damage the villain if they just carried video cameras with them is more than I find acceptable. So you can imagine why I absolutely hated that Superman brought a reporter to a prison where it was discovered that a Black Ops government unit was kidnapping and experimenting on prisoners and employees and turning them into mutants, and nothing happened. The next episode is about Lois competing with Vicky Vale to get the inside scoop about a missing scientist and the third instance of giant robots in Metropolis, when, in keeping with the characterization of that very episode, she should have broken the biggest story of the year before she even got off the boat in the last episode. What happened to these people? But you see, if they did reveal all the shady things they discovered, then the plot would have to change. And their odd refusal to do so is the only way I can imagine justifying Lex, and especially Slade, not going to prison as Amanda Waller goes on the run. Lois and Clark just made zero attempts to name them in a newspaper article, as all good reporters do. But that's kind of a tangent. After all, this video is about how everything I've talked about previously affects the best part of the story so far, which I will call the Supergirl arc. Character-wise, I think they're great, but there is only one instance of trying to involve the humans in the superhuman plot that didn't feel forced. The first episode before shit hits the fan. Apart from the plot convenience of Jimmy finding Kara, but you know, that's actually acceptable. Olsen's 11 was the worst episode in the storyline. It was a great extension of Lois's arc, even if they chose the most bizarre character to help her with her issues, and a good showcase of Jimmy's own mindset of avoiding violence going into the storyline. But the heist was atrocious. There are so many steps they just have to skip over because there's no way to justify it happening. Like, how did they get a gorilla inside Star Labs without being noticed? And the steps they show aren't much better. They did the classic, when shifts change, no one waits for their replacement to arrive before they leave thing, and Livewire somehow knew that there'd be no guards for exactly 30 seconds. And there was no one in the security room to see them on cameras do all the shady things they were doing. Up until Waller figured out what was going on, their victories were carried by their opponent's incompetence. And you know what really upsets me? 2 episodes ago, Lois stole invisibility technology and just left it in her bedroom. And yet it's almost impressively irrelevant. I guess she kinda forgot. And then it became extremely clear that so many of their victories going forward were going to keep stemming from their opponent's lack of security when they planned a second break-in. But admittedly, this one makes more sense because Kara's there and has inside knowledge that makes sense. But even that knowledge wasn't very helpful, and they get chased by Brainiac's robots. And by the magic of happening off screen, they managed to outrun these robots that could hunt Superman down before they run into Kara, who's getting her ass kicked by Brainiac. And then the most baffling set of occurrences happen, and for the life of me, I still can't figure out what happened. Lois sees Brainiac controlling Superman, and somehow manages to correctly connect that the marks on his forehead have something to do with the floating things that look nothing like them. Then, off screen, in the less than 2 minutes before Brainiac flushes them into space, she manages to grab one without being noticed, even though they are floating like 25 feet in the air where Kara and Brainiac are fighting. Except they're not, because they've disappeared as the fight starts. And somehow knowing what it is and how it works, she immediately connects it right to her forehead, also somehow knowing that it will directly beam her consciousness into Clark's mind. Something even the audience doesn't know, because that's not how Kara described it when she showed Clark. And this really upsets me because, in my opinion, it's not even that hard to fix. Step 1. Make the thought projectors look more like the marks on Clark's head, or vice versa. Maybe put Brainiac's logo on them, just something to make it clear why Lois assumed they were one and the same. Step 2. Have Kara verbally express surprise that the thought projector is controlling Clark and have Brainiac brag about trapping him in his mind. Step 3. When Brainiac does this, make Kara's body knock a few down. It's not perfect, but I'm confident it's better. As it stands, all of Lois' actions would only make sense if Kara did it, except the put the thing on immediately to go after Clark. That's very much a Lois thing. And look, I know what they're doing. They want Superman's friends to help save him. And that's sweet. But it's also transparent that the world is going out of its way to help them succeed. Take Lois entering Brainiac's prison. Somehow, he can't control her, and he can't delete her. That kind of makes sense. But can someone tell me why the supercomputer keeps resetting the simulation despite knowing it will have to look for her again while she tries to find Clark instead of just grabbing her and flying her out of the city to trap her somewhere? I came up with that plan as I was watching the episode here, the second time it happened. So the fact that the supercomputer keeps making the same mistake over and over again until Lois finally succeeded was baffling. I think Brainiac's supposed to be smarter than me. And yes, I know characters won't make the same decisions as the audience and will keep to their characterization, but I do not believe Brainiac is characterized in a way to do all of this. But you know what? Let's assume I'm wrong. What's Jimmy doing?
The Wolfpack rides again!
Steve? How? What? Steve?
So Amanda Waller finally arrested Lois, Jimmy, and Kara with several soldiers with several trucks, and then decided to transport them with just herself and Slade. And then they got distracted by news trucks getting in their way and didn't notice Steve breaking their prisoners out with bolt cutters. Is that in character for her too? Seriously, bolt cutters. Look at what Kara's in. Also, like when Steve cuts Jimmy free, you see there are two sets of, I'm gonna call them chains. But Jimmy's the only one chained down like that there, and then the actual handcuffs just immediately fall apart. These are the kind of things you notice when you keep rewatching the scene to try and make sense of what just happened. Also, the Daily Planets and Vicky Vales, for some reason, whole logic in their spontaneous yet somehow successful ambush is that arresting a journalist is illegal. Which A, I'm pretty sure journalists can be arrested, and B, what they're describing more accurately describes this guy in Ocean's 11. The whole sequence makes less sense every time I rewatch it, but it does allow Steve to say this.
Aren't you Superman's cousin? Cause that guy gets beat up, like, all the time.
Ha! True. It actually makes more sense, though not by much, that Steel and Superman's enemies help him because they have the power to do so while their opponents are actually trying, and oh god, the outfits. Again. It's somehow worse than I remember. You know, when I made my video about the character designs in this show, people said they were going to evolve the villain's looks as the show went on, but somehow we've de-evolved Livewire back into her outfit because, I don't know, the show wants me to nickname the group Loser Rangers or something. I'll admit, Banshee's got the best design here, but that's a low bar. Seriously, how did Steel get his suit back? And what exactly was General Lane doing that he got all these criminals to work together, and did he like time it so perfectly, or were they just sitting around waiting for the inevitable alien invasion? For the rest of the episode, the scale's gotten just so big that there really is no logical way for Lois and Jimmy to keep being relevant. Fortunately for them, there is an illogical way. When Brainiac controls Kara, they decide to go help. Then I guess Lois develops the ability to see the future from her contact with the thought projector because they immediately start driving somewhere so they can help. Where? I have no idea. Clark and Kara are zipping around the city fighting each other and giant robots. Yet, they are already there when the super twins smash into a random spot on the ground. I cannot be the only one who knows that makes no sense. But they need to be there so they can help Clark talk Kara down so both of them can work together to actually do the finale. I'm gonna say something crazy. At this point, I find myself wishing the show cut down on their screen time. I know that I would hate if they were suddenly relevant for half of the season, but the way this is written, Kara and Clark could just do most of this themselves. We'd miss out on all the character development, but I wouldn't find myself wondering what the hell is happening every time a non-Kryptonian is on screen. Picture it. Kara goes back on her own, Instead of Olsen's 11, we have her come to terms with what she was forced to do over a whole episode while on Kandor, surrounded by all the mementos of the places she conquered. Then she fights Brainiac, loses, grabs the third projector, chases Kandor with her ship, goes into Clark's head while it's on autopilot, talks him out of it, then Clark does the same to her when Brainiac takes control of her body. Now, what I just described obviously has several problems, and I don't see a version of this story where a character besides Lois going inside Clark's head is better than what we got. But when Lois and Jimmy teleport in to help hug Kara, I can't help but think these two could totally be written out of the story, as true as it may or may not be. And the crazy thing is, they also managed to screw with Lois' storyline, because despite the emotional falling out with her father in episode 4, which is kind of what cemented how great her character was for me. I mean, I already thought it was great, but this really cemented it. He just appears to help with the alien invasion and then is hanging out with everyone. And Lois is too busy trying to be relevant to the plot to even share a scene with him throughout the entire finale, so he has his character resolution with Amanda Waller. And all I can say in response to that is the words I'm really starting to hate having to say after season finales. Maybe they'll address it next season. Look, I like this show, and I like the character writing, and I love most of the Supergirl storyline, but the way its plot is written just leaves something to be desired. And despite being such great characters, the story clearly struggles with implementing Jimmy and Lois, and honestly most of the human cast in a way that makes me go, wait, that makes no sense. But they kinda have to implement that cast because otherwise it would just be Superman doing everything on his own. And that's not what they want, and it's not something I would force them to have to do. Despite my earlier statements, I don't really think the story would be made better by removing two of its main characters, but I definitely think their roles needed to be adjusted, maybe even reduced a tad. I would very much welcome giving Kara more screen time to ruminate on what Brainiac made her do. But those are my thoughts. What do you think of My Adventures with Superman and how it handles its human cast? Tell me down below, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Thank you, and good day.